I'm going to focus on work with two organizations I'm currently working with. One is an autism organization, and one is a secondary school. It's a private Jewish day school in Toronto, an Orthodox girls' school. And we're working with the frontline staff, but also the rabbis, the chief executive officers, but mostly with the teachers as well, to really try to figure out what does it mean to design instruction. How do you really approach the curriculum, not just when you're, and I'll talk about two young women, one on the autism spectrum and one living with Down syndrome, but the approach to take is in any program, in any classroom for 25 or 30 learners, you have a diverse student body. It's not just about including the student you've characterized as having the most severe cognitive, physical disability. It's about how do you truly differentiate so that you can keep pathways open for youth for not only work, but post-secondary education, colleges and universities, where in Ontario there is progress being made in terms of admitting students who would have what would be considered moderate to severe developmental disabilities, but it needs to start when they're in kindergarten or grade 1 in teaching students how to have voice, how to make choices, how to problem solve and make decisions. We presume all students know how to do that. So if we really want youth to exit their secondary school careers and have pathways remain open and not closed by the age of 6 or 7, where we've decided the diagnosis will limit what instruction looks like in impoverished or congregated settings, that we need to start much earlier. So what we also don't always take into account is most practitioners do not understand the theoretical underpinnings of their practices. They may not understand the social model, the medical model from which they're operating. I also introduce, because my PhD was in the area of ethics and leadership, a transformed ethic of care that blends feminist and critical disability perspectives within a social model of disability. And these are introduced into the professional learning sessions I have with staff in both of these organizations. I also introduce what does authentic person-directed planning look like, not only in their instructional designs and curriculum, but in their policies and in their protocols. You'll often see mission statements and vision and values that absolutely talk about self-determination and inclusion, but when you look at their admissions or intake questions, when you look at their policies, there's a lot of incongruence there. And then finally, within the 12 minutes, that is probably 9 by now, I'll talk about the impact of the approach on program designs, keeping pathways open, and professional practices and relational aspects of care. So very quickly, many schools, many organizations say they're operating from a social model of disability where they are addressing structures, disabling attitudes, and look at it as a systemic issue around exclusion or marginalization. However, when you look at their curriculum designs or you look at their protocols, they're still very much talking about the deficit is residing within the individual and not so much in terms of their practices and policies. So my work is really going into organizations, big and small, to support with interrogating their documents. Really, what does it mean to do a document analysis and make sure the language is right before you even move into your practices? After 30 years, I've stopped trying to walk into an organization and say you need to change your attitudes. You need to introduce new practices where staff actually begin to feel competent before you'll see any real significant shift in attitude. And so we always talk about presuming competence of the person with the disability. We tend to presume competence with our staff, but very often frontliners or educators won't admit. It's not just a fear of difference, it's a fear of once I interact with all these students, am I even a competent enough teacher to teach them all? So you have to give permission to the educators to say, I really don't know. So a lot of my work is those working sessions of working with the curriculum. So in any admissions process, this is an example of a question from a medical model, and this is still in many of the organization's intake processes, a question like this might be posed. Does your disability make it difficult to travel by bus? The disability residing solely within the individual, and a transformed question within a social model of disability, are there any transportation or financial problems that prevent you? So let's look at the systemic barriers that still exist that prevent you from accessing transportation to get to your job, to get to your college. So I do, a lot of my study is from the critical disability studies and feminist studies, and it's blended here in what I'm calling a transformed ethic of care. Yes, you have to look at rights and responsibilities, but if you go into schools and you say, it's your duty to accommodate, you've admitted all these children, you must accommodate, the first question back is, will I find myself discriminating in some way and in front of a human rights tribunal? You want to shift from that fear of I'm getting in trouble to actually it's a responsibility, it's a right, but you're going to love actually engaging in curriculum design and programs and service design where all are included, and your own sense of competency will rise incredibly. So it's really thinking about moral knowledge, that everyone does certainly have a right, but that we're human beings, and we talk about preserving dignity, but it's a fundamental right. Nobody has the right to take it away. And if we really look at ourselves as needing each other and caring for each other throughout a lifespan in different ways, we move from what we're talking about when we talk about autonomy and independence to the whole notion of interdependence. We do rely on each other each and every day in our lives. And so quickly, person-directed planning, talk a little bit about that. By the time children are 21, or young people with disabilities, and they leave school in Ontario and most other provinces in Canada, we expect them to understand what it means to make choices and problem solve and make decisions. But much earlier, we need to teach this to all students. It has to be explicit teaching in your instructional designs, so they're much better prepared by the time they're exiting into the adult world. And so in the intake process, if organizations really want to begin practicing a person-directed planning approach, these are some of the questions of really getting to know the individual so that we move from deficit-driven designs to strengths-based designs in personalized programming. I'm going to highlight two quick cases. Anne, who is on the autism spectrum, visits her grandmother every week in a nursing home, and the grandmother complains the food is terrible and the service is terrible, so Anne has decided she's going to improve those types of services. With the staff in this organization, they research the role together so that there needs to be certain learning expectations that are built into what was called the culinary hospitality pathway in this organization so that she can achieve this big goal. In order to do that, she works together with the staff, and in the paper there's lots of templates and other examples. I have to go really quickly through this, of what are the learning expectations over time within this one-year program that she would need to achieve. Not that she couldn't stay longer, but it's great to have the exit strategy. What will she need to do? And so you'll see the I language so that she truly understands the learning goals in her individual support plan. In the second case, Rachel is living with Down syndrome, the first student in this Orthodox Jewish day school, secondary school. There have been other students admitted to the school, but it was still based on the charity, religious, compassion model of we will take care of everyone in our communities, but this was moving beyond. We said to the head of school, the rabbi, the general studies principal, no, this young woman wants to go to college. Let's start mapping out in grade 9. So she'll be moving into grade 10. What do her credits need to look like in order to keep the pathway of college open? So for grade 9, she has achieved all the credits she needs going into grade 10. This required working with, for the first year, the general studies teachers that came together with their curriculum. What we also introduced was a citizen education framework. What do we want from all our young people? To be good citizens, to be productive, to care for each other, to develop that notion of interdependence, to be part of a democracy. And so looking and using this as our placemat for our curriculum development really supported planning for all children in all classrooms. And this is just an example of 5 teachers that came together, 6 teachers, and said, okay, what we've seen threaded throughout the grade 10 curriculum as we plan for that is community. Community is threaded throughout. From my particular course content, I'm not thinking about modification or how much modification. I'm looking at all my students and saying, what are some of the essential questions that I need to be asking for them to achieve this credit and the learning I want them to learn? And so, what are the big ideas, the enduring understandings I want for all students in the secondary school? Not just for this young woman with Down syndrome, but for all. And so I introduced what's called a concept-based emphasis, and let's look at the concepts threaded throughout your subjects. What are the overall expectations in your courses? What are the enduring understandings through big ideas? And this will enable all students to achieve credit without watering it down, without compromising the integrity of it. And so I have 2 minutes by my watch. What are some of the transformations? Well, it's in the program design. They don't look at this now that they've engaged in it for a year as extra workload, as if you put these students in my classroom, this is going to be so much additional work. I actually see how this is benefiting the 5 children with learning disabilities, or whatever they were thinking about in terms of how do I accommodate all learners. It's left pathways open. We tend to narrow by grade 3 in Ontario. If we start placing in what's called developmental disabilities classes or multiple disabilities classes, we tend to say by that diagnosis, they'll volunteer maybe, or they'll participate, or they'll be in day programs, but we don't reach high enough and we narrow the pathways too soon. They see how you can keep the pathways open. The collaborative planning, that learning exchange in both organizations has been monumental. They absolutely love it and want more of it. It costs very little to release teachers for short periods of time to collaborate. And the relational aspects of care. Professionals, especially when they've been working as teachers with young students with developmental disabilities, have always, and hadn't thought about it, made the decisions for them, the placement decisions, what programs should look like. Starting much earlier, grade 1 for me, if they call me in early enough, or kindergarten, start asking the student what they like best in school. What do they love? What do they think they're good at? And once we start to do that, we move away from that diagnosis and the deficit-driven curriculum that I can assure you, they need to learn how to do chores or their laundry. Well, everybody can learn that, but it doesn't have to be during the instructional day. So it's it's beyond the human rights to achieving an ethical awareness. This is my favorite quote. People know what they do. They'll tell you what their job is. They frequently know why they do what they do. I'm here to educate children and help them. But what they don't know is what they do does. And so if you continue not to interrogate the status quo and you're happy with your practices, which continue to disadvantage so many young people, they don't even, and they would never intentionally harm, but they understand through this process, and it's not to leave people with guilt, that there is harm that happens if you don't begin to look at it. And so bringing the young voice in much earlier truly equalizes the balance of power and decision-making and teaching voice. What it means to have a voice and choice much earlier equalizes that professional and personal relationship. And future research, which I'm currently engaged in myself, there's very little impact. I don't know about other countries. It might be interesting to hear about that, of what person-directed planning, which is used in many places. What are the benefits? What's the impact been on an individual, but on an organizational basis? how blending theory and introducing theories of practice into practice might improve situations, and certainly always more applied research for government and public service in order to improve the lives of individuals with disabilities. Thank you, and I hope I did the 12 minutes.